Kia ora, hello, I'm Philip Duncan. It is Friday the 24th of October. Welcome to Labour Weekend. We've got your forecast for the long weekend and the outlook for the final week of October. Let's have a look at the satellite and lightning map at the moment. So the big storm yesterday, this is it here, south of the Chatham Islands, moving very quickly away from us. But as you can see, there are other areas of low pressure, not as stormy, but it does keep the westerly flow around New Zealand alive, and it also keeps the western showers coming through and the colder air sticking around southern parts of New Zealand, where we've seen a few thunderstorms this morning, a few showers brushing through Fovo Strait and coastal parts of Southland. On the western side of New Zealand, there's a fair bit of cloud around in some areas, but mostly dry, especially in the North Island, and some high cloud here popping up around parts of Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, but really dry weather around eastern New Zealand, and a very different day today to what yesterday was like. So let's have a look at the big picture. You can see the storm here, southeast of the Chatham Islands by 4 o'clock Friday afternoon. Our big high is still up here to the north, and that subtropical airflow is now moving away from us. The next low, tracking along south of New Zealand here, and a big southerly coming through. So that's why, those temperatures are down in the south, the southwest, that colder airflow coming up from the Southern Ocean area. But there is a bit of a northwesterly kicking in this afternoon. So while it is colder, it's not as cold as it could be if it was just directly coming straight on in. And a bit of a breeze still through Cook Strait and nor'easters around parts of Canterbury. So here is 4 o'clock Friday on the air pressure map. Here is the storm, 941 hectopascals. Now yesterday, when that low was over Stewart Island on Thursday afternoon, it was down to 957 hectopascals, or at least it was as it was starting to move away. Now, if you don't really understand air pressure, Cyclone Gabrielle was 965 hectopascals. This was 957. The lower it goes, the more powerful the storm is. Now, tropical cyclones and Southern Ocean storms are very different systems. Cyclone, all the energy's right there in the middle. These sorts of storms that can fan right out, as you see here with this one here on Friday afternoon. So windy weather spread out yesterday, that's why we had that storm, but right near the centre as well, as it deepened, moving away from Stewart Island, that's why we saw that wind damage around Southland. So a significant storm, that sort of air pressure in the Southern Ocean's normal, but to see it come right up into the New Zealand area, that is not so normal. And that does speak to the stormier conditions we're getting this spring around Antarctica. So lighter winds in the North Island for Friday, as I say, a bit breezy through Cook Strait, and the wind comes back in the lower South Island where that polar boundary just won't go away. So going into Saturday, there it is again, the next low tracking by much further south and not as stormy. You'll be pleased to know about that. But because it's another low, it does drag in another burst of showers, maybe a couple of thunderstorms in there, and that moves again up the west coast. There's quite a large area of cold air coming in behind that system. So that starts on Saturday, maybe later into the day, to move up the west coast. And in the North Island, it's a southwesterly wind, nothing too major there, and more of a west to northwesterly, around Wellington and Wairarapa Upper. Now we go to Sunday, and that polar cold airflow goes right up to the top of the South Island. So the whole west coast will feel that temperature drop with rain and showers moving through. And of course, some of that will fall as snow now that that polar boundary is moving northwards along the mountains, the ranges, and potentially the alpine passes. So keep up to date with the Met Service warnings and watches as you go through the weekend. In the North Island, fairly dry, but a few showers around. And that west to southwesterly starts to pick up. Usually areas like Auckland, which is a wind tunnel for the southwesters, a bit like how Cook Strait is a wind tunnel for the nor'westers. Eastern areas, very sorry to say, I know many of you around Gisborne, Tairāwhiti, Hawke's Bay, East Cape, you want some rain. This is not the setup, and I'm sad to say that over the next couple of weeks, we're not really seeing much in the way of rain, not just yet. And on top of that, still windy weather, which dries the ground out even more. So this is at the lowest end, really, of the wind gust, getting into the severe wind gust area. So yes, there might be some wind warnings from the Met Service. This is nothing like the winds that we just had, so don't worry too much, but this is going to be another area where we might see some severe gales at the lower North Island and through parts of the South Island's Southern Alps. We do, for the most part, this is not a big problem, but if you're in a tent or a caravan with an awning this long weekend, that's not really the forecast you want to see, but there's still some large, calmer areas in the mix. Now on Monday, Labor Day Monday, in comes the next low. 980 hectopascals. Now, if we hadn't have had that storm yesterday, I'd be talking about that's quite low air pressure. But compared to 957, that is, it's not as stormy, but it's still going to produce another burst of gales and they could be damaging. Not as bad as what we've just had, but another burst of potentially severe gales and heavy west coast rain as well. There's the polar boundary in the dark blue line. That drops southwards. You can ignore the number there. That's just meaning that it's high up in the atmosphere. Windy northwesterlies blowing along the eastern side of the country. So warm and dry in the east, colder, more wintry around Southland, parts of Otago and Fiordland. And here's the wind gust map for later in the day. Now on Monday, this surge of wind going around that low pressure zone is likely to come in around Taranaki, Nelson, sort of the Cook Strait area in the afternoon. And then by evening here at 7 o'clock, pushing further in towards Manawatu, Horowhenua, down towards Kapiti, Wellington, and of course along the eastern side of the mountains and ranges of the North Island. So a surge of very windy weather comes through on Monday evening, hopefully most of it sort of towards the end of the weekend, but we're not completely done yet with the wind or the cold. Tuesday next week, the polar boundary once more back up, this time right over the entire South Island. So you've got rain again falling, and this time it'll be falling as snow as well on the mountains, the ranges, and potentially the alpine passes. There might be some rain that spills over into parts of Canterbury as well, and Otago, and Southland has the colder winds coming through with that southwesterly. Southerlies into Wellington, south to southwesterlies moving into the North Island as well with a period of rain or showers. This, I actually didn't say it before as well, these are both 24-hour rainfall maps from the Labor Day one and this one here. So 24 hours up to 1 p.m. Tuesday, that's the rain that you're seeing. So for the North Island, it's probably quite helpful. Eastern areas though, sorry to say, the blue is at the bottom of the scale, and there's a lot of blue around, but that's just showing that it's going to be cloudy with the chance of showers when you see a lot of blue shading like that at the lowest end of the scale. More wind on Tuesday as well. So, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the gusty stuff comes back. It's not as widespread as it's been. And in this case, it's more about just letting you know it's going to be a windy day around Auckland and coastal Waikato, Taranaki, Coromandel Peninsula and around Western Bay of Plenty. And then it could also jump over to the eastern side around Northern Hawke's Bay, up towards Gisborne, Tairāwhiti, East Cape. So windy weather again carries on. But if you've got the pale shading, may not be too bad, even around Wellington. We have to wait and see. It might move a little bit in there, but for now, it doesn't look too bad. Wednesday of next week, well, I told you that there could be a high coming for the start of November. We're getting closer to it here as we go to the Wednesday map. The polar boundary is still around the southern half of New Zealand, so your temperatures are still down below normal for the most part. In the North Island, not too bad. Southwesterly winds, mostly dry. On Thursday, again, not a huge deal of change. We've still got southwest winds around the western side of the North Island, and they're more northwesterly along the eastern side. In the South Island, the polar boundary remains, so the temperatures are still down for Southland, Otago, Fiordland and Westland. But north of that, not really too bad. And let's go to Friday of next week. It's sort of Groundhog Day. It doesn't look any different almost each day through next week, but the high does get closer to the North Island. So while you may not really feel the change, those southwesterly winds blowing through or westerly winds depending on where you are, and the cold weather stays in the south, showers on the west coast, a few showers into Southland, maybe into Dunedin, but it doesn't look like a huge amount there with the very pale blue shading. But that polar boundary really hanging around might be a bit of a break in it afterwards because that's the northerly flow coming out of Australia. Let's make sense of the rainfall. A very quick animation for you, but it shows the next 8 days and all that rain falling on the west coast. You'll be happy to know that at least it's only 150 millimetres this time. But of course, with all the damage, the roads that are still closed, it's going to be a bit of a pain to have that rain return. It tapers off the further north you go and into the North Island. Nothing too alarming there. The only thing that's probably annoying some of the viewers is the fact that we're not really seeing rain around the eastern side of the North Island, the one area that really does want it at the moment. That's all from me on a very busy week. Good luck with the cleanup. If you're in one of those affected areas, have yourselves a great long weekend. I'll see you again next week.